Yo, what's up, Hivers? What's up, ThreeTuneTuesdayers? Hope everybody's good. Yeah, actually, I did a bunch of art for ThreeTuneTuesday, and some of it didn't really come out that great. It was quite a frustrating experience trying to use ChatGPT. It's really not that smart. I mean, obviously, it's not really a thinking thing. It's just, it memorizes, an almost infinite amount of cues and responds to key terms and that kind of thing. But it's just funny how some people treat this thing like it's about to, like it's about to be, the Terminator up in here. No doubt there's some risk there, but it's not because they're going to have this moment of, what's the term? When they'll be able to think for themselves. I forgot the term. You guys are probably shouting it. That I don't think that's even possible. Now, you could have things that are programmed to react to billions of things that can appear to be independent and mimic human activity. I don't doubt that. But will there be an actual day where they go rogue and actually can think in like a similar to a human sense? No. And Joe Rogan won't shut up about this. Oh man, we're gonna get to the what is it called? The singular. Oh, whatever the term is. But anyway, ChatGPT can't even do my 3-2-Tuesday cover art right. There's two black holes where my eyes are supposed to be, and now my cartoon image. I like to put a little work in, so I was gonna do my cartoon animated image with 3 posters of the 3 artists that I picked, that week. And it just keeps mixing up old requests. It puts a different band poster in. It's just not very good. Not very good at all. But anyway, 3-Tune-Tuesday. Let's see, what do we got here? So this week, I thought I'd pick 3 albums from 3 huge 90s bands, but it's not the first album for all of them. It's actually the second full length for 2, the first album for 1. And these are 1989 albums from artists who, well, I'll go, the Beastie Boys will be first. The Beastie Boys had 3 huge albums in the 90s. Check Your Head, 1992. Ill Communication, 94. And Hello Nasty, 1998. So going backwards, 98, Hello Nasty had Intergalactic, which is just huge. The second single was Body Movin', which was like, I really didn't like at the time, but it was all over MTV. It was huge. And then 3 MCs and 1 DJ did not get a lot of play on MTV and radio, but I've learned to love it. And then Ill Communication, probably the biggest single was Going On No, It's a Sabotage. It's a Sabotage. And a bunch of other singles that were all over MTV. Check Your Head, the biggest single was probably So What You Want. What You Want. You guys know it. And there's some great tunes and other singles on those records. But, I grew up in that time, so I kind of put the Beastie Boys in terms of, like, 90s legendary status. Beastie Boys are right up there with Nirvana. But even in terms of longevity, like, Nirvana had 2 albums in the 90s. 2 huge albums, especially 91. And then they had an 89 record. If Kurt, hadn't left early, would they have gone on to have another huge record in 95? Maybe 97, 98? It kind of felt like that thing was winding down. There was a lot of substance abuse. And the band probably would have broken up. Maybe they would have done one more record. But, I think some of the legend, with Kurt piecing out early, I think that's kind of added legend over the years. I remember kids in high school, like in 1999, were obsessed with Nirvana. And I kind of wondered, like, if they had done 2 more albums and then kind of broken up, no doubt about it, when Nevermind came out in 91, it was huge. I mean, I've had people I've met over the years who are hardcore 80s hair metal dudes who were like, no, Nirvana, like, they blew us out of the water. They blew our scene out of the water. It was the biggest thing ever. So not to take away from how big it was, but I'm kind of more talking about bands that were able to like put out like 4 albums and all be successes. Who would that be? Beastie Boys. If you count Paul's Boutique from 1989, which half the singles came out in 1990, even though the record came out in 89, you got Paul's Boutique, then you got 92 Check Your Head, then you got Ill Communication 94, and then Hello Nasty 98. You know, easily, they released so much music, they easily could have had an album out in 96. And it literally could have been songs from Ill Communication and Hello Nasty with a couple filler songs, and they would still be classic albums because they're just one of those bands that is so good and so classic. The Chili Peppers, if you look at 91 and 99 and didn't see anything in the middle, you would think the Chili Peppers have like 5 albums out in the 90s that are like the hugest things ever. Because their 91 record put them on the map. And then Californication 99 was huge and a really good record. And then you would look and you'd be like, oh, they put out an album in 95. Okay. 4 years in between each album. I thought they'd have at least one more. But all right, it's got to be a great record. And no, it's not. The 95 record is terrible. John Frusciante had left the band, and Dave Navarro was in there, so the chemistry was off. I think also probably would not have been as good as those 2 albums from 91 or 99. Even if John was in the band, I think substance abuse and stuff was going on, but I think it would have been better. Red Hot Minute, that's the 95 album. I mean, it's just a bad record. You know, but they had their 89 album, Mother's Milk, which, you know, similar to these other bands. Anyway, I'm kind of jumping all over the place. Beastie Boys, Paul's Boutique, my first pick. Shake Your Rump. That is our first tune of the day. We're only 8 minutes in and getting to the first tune, you know. Excuse me. Next up, we're going Soundgarden from the album Louder Than Love. Their A&M Records major label debut, which really, commercially, they were not huge. I mean, they were definitely on 120 Minutes on MTV, which featured a lot of like smaller, like indie bands. They were playing clubs. They definitely had a following, but not a huge following. This album might as well have, you know, been on an indie label. Because they would have made more money if it was on an indie label. So they might as well have waited till the next album, which did blow up. But this is a great record. I mean, it's you can kind of see how, like in 1989, if Soundgarden blew up, it wouldn't have had the same effect as, like, you know, when Nirvana blew up. Like, even though Soundgarden is that Seattle scene, you know, that DIY kind of vibe, you know, less glam and less, you know, less performance than the hair metal 80s stuff. I feel like they could exist in that world. Like, Soundgarden opened up for Guns N' Roses in 92. Nirvana refused to, you know. Where Alice in Chains opened up for Van Halen in 1991. You know, so, like, it's not like the whole Seattle thing was anti that whole thing. It was really more Nirvana was. And because these bands were from Seattle and friends of Nirvana, it was kind of like lumped into the same thing. But there are these bands that I think better bridge those worlds, like Mother Love Bone would have been perfect. We've talked about that before. I'm delaying because I'm not sure which song I want to go with. It's either going to be Loud Love or Hands All Over. I'm going to give it a second listen and let you know. But again, Soundgarden, their 91 album, 2 huge alternative rock singles, huge play on MTV. You had the song Outshined, and Rusty Cage. Huge songs on alternative rock radio. Major airplay on rock stations across the country. Major MTV play. You know, they tour for a while. They come out with their next album, 1994, Super Unknown. Literally, one of the songs makes it to pop radio. Black Hole Sun was played on Z100, New York City's pop radio station. You would hear it in between, Hey, What's Going On from the Four Non Blondes. Hey, hey, what's going on? And then you'd hear like 2 Princes, banging out, a banging out. If you would like to call me baby, just go ahead now. And then you'd hear like Ace of Base. And then you would hear Black Hole Sun from Soundgarden. And then you'd hear like Hey Jealousy from the Gin Blossoms. Or some R&B song or something like that, you know. It did happen. It did happen. I was there and I remember being on the school bus in elementary school and hearing Black Hole Sun on pop radio. You would songs like Fell on Black Days, huge song. You know, Day I Tried to Live, probably my favorite song on that album. So that was obviously their biggest album. And then 1996, what is it, Down on the Upside. I love the singles from this album. And I remember kind of coming of age, you know, 96, 97, when they were really getting a lot of play. You have the song Pretty News. And I don't like what you got me hanging from. You know, a lot of fans are not as crazy about the 96 record. And apparently it didn't do as well as the 94 record. But I just remember hearing it all over the radio. The 3 singles. There's what is it called? Something The Outside World. Blow Up the Outside World. That was a single on that record. And what was that other song? I lost my love today. Would you lie for me? 3 big singles. And, you know, then the band broke up. I would say at the top of their game. I know they probably came down a level. But, you know, that's 3 huge albums in the 90s and kicked off by this album. So that's like a 4-album run with just four great monster records. You know, different levels of success. You know, Beastie Boys, obviously. And this is the note I was going to make before. A lot of people think of the Beastie Boys as an 80s group because their first album, License to Ill, No Sleep Till Brooklyn, Fight for Your Right to Party, that funky monkey barrel, girls, dun, 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 dun. That might be on the next record, but huge commercially. And then Paul's Boutique, it you know, they really made like kind of the Pet Sounds of hip hop, like a very different experimental record. A lot of the fans didn't get it, but I mean I think it's their best album in a lot of ways. Probably not the one I listen to the most, but just looking back as a grown up, you know, 40 years old, I think Paul's Boutique was the most interesting they released at the time and everything. They could have just done another License to Ill, you know, been the frat rock band and made a lot of money. Instead, they tried to do something different, and, you know, that led to Check Your Head and Ill Communication. It could have been a very different ride, and I'm not bashing the first album. I think the first album's cool. I just think they grew into something a lot more important, in my opinion. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about bands that were iconic. Even if some of the albums were not as successful as others commercially. To have 4 albums in a row, even if the first one of the bunch, was not as known and stuff, to have 4 albums in a row that are just sick, great albums, that's what I'm trying to highlight today. So third up, 9 Inch Nails, their first album, Trent Reznor's first album, 1989. The singles really blew up in 1990. So, you could definitely do these songs on a 90s Friday. I feel like I pick Head Like a Hole and Terrible Lie. I've picked them a lot for music posts. So I'm going to pick a different song that I haven't picked, at least not in years. The song Down In It. Again, from the first 9 Inch Nails record, Pretty Hate Machine. And now this album did have some commercial success. And then the next full length doesn't come for 5 years. But what does come is a 7-song EP in 1992, which included the song Wish, which was just a monster alternative rock radio success. A lot of play on MTV. It had to be annoying waiting for the new music if you were a big fan, because it was 5 years to the next full length. But, you got that EP in the middle to kind of hold you over. And then you obviously had the 94 record, which, had the song Closer, which, again, was a song that was an alternative rock song that literally made it to pop radio because it was just so huge. I remember literally being in my friend's parents' car going to, their birthday party. It was going upstate to a haunted hayride thing, because their birthday was near Halloween, and listening to the pop radio station on the way, because his sister made us listen to it. And I remember hearing Closer 3 times, twice there and then once on the way back. It's just, you cannot overstate how huge that album was. March of the Pigs was on that album. Obviously the song Hurt, later covered by Johnny Cash, is on that album. But I think most people know the song Closer. It was just so huge. And then again, you wait 5 years for the third full length, 1999, which I think is an amazing record. I think it did a little less commercially, because by that time, I was in high school and had MTV, and I don't remember seeing a lot of 9 Inch Nails videos at that time. I remember seeing the premiere of 1 or 2 of them, but not heavy rotation, which is really bizarre because it's a great album. Together Now, you and me together now. There's a music video for that one. Starsuckers, and it's also a double album. And it's probably my favorite, to be totally honest. And then the funny thing is, 2005 comes around. I'm not even thinking about 9 Inch Nails. And all of a sudden, they're all over MTV, nonstop. And they're huge again, with singles like Bite the Hand That Feeds. Every Day Is Exactly the Same. The album White Teeth, 2005. I mean, we're talking 5.5 years later. And it's huge. And if you talk to people that are younger that, were in school at the time, I had been out of high school for a couple of years at that point. They think that was the biggest 9 Inch Nails record because it was just so huge when they were around. But in reality, you would have to put the Downward Spiral as the biggest commercial success in 1994. I think those kids that came later just did not know how big it was. But again, even though it's a spaced out run, you have the first full length, 89, Pretty Hate Machine, the one we're covering for our third tune. You have the EP that came out in 92, 7 songs, so not a full length. You have the full length, Downward Spiral, the second big album. And then you have the third album, 99. So 3.5 albums, but they're just incredibly good. And then if you want to kind of put a cantilever on it, and kind of bring in the 2005 record, kind of call it one big collection of 4.5 records. Let's just call it 5 because one of them's a double album anyway. It's pretty wild how good that run was. And then all of a sudden he puts out an album 2 years later that I remember seeing on MTV in 2007, 2008. I don't know why all of a sudden it's like, hey, I've been taking 5 years. I'm just going to put some stuff out. I'm guessing they probably had a lot of it from the previous session. And then I think after that, it was actually a long time because Trent Reznor started doing scores to movies and stuff. And some of the albums are just a little very different. And I think it kind of started like a new space, a new era of the band. But I would put their first 5 albums plus the EP, in one box and kind of call that one run, even though it was like 18 and a half years. About 18, let's just call it 18 years. It's a pretty sick run. So you have these bands, like No Doubt. They had one of the biggest albums of the 90s. They had an album before that one in 92 that no one ever heard. And it's just a typical bland ska album. And then you have No Doubt's follow-up to Tragic Kingdom. Again, Tragic Kingdom came out in 1995. They really blew up in 96, 97. They released 6 singles from that album. They were headlining arenas for 2.5 years, toured the world. I mean, there's not that many records that were that big. I would say like the Spin Doctors in the 90s. They had one huge album and then their follow-ups bombed commercially. Although they're some of the most talented musicians ever. Ace of Base. They're this pop group that had like 5 huge singles. I bought that CD. I wasn't into that kind of music. Everybody had that CD, The Sign. It's just, the one with the sign on it. Hootie and the Blowfish. I'm not saying it's good music. I'm saying these are these bands that had these huge albums with generally more than... I'm not talking about one-hit wonders. I'm talking about one album where they never really do a lot again, but that album has a lot more than one hit. It's just their next album does not even go near it. It looked like Green Day was going to be that when their follow-up to Dookie came out. And then all of a sudden, they have their biggest hit ever with Time of Your Life, 2 albums later. And then in 2004, when they're opening up for Blink-182, they're opening up for Blink-182 in 2002, which just was so weird because you would think Blink-182 would be opening up for Green Day just because of the timing of it and everything. But they had really fallen off. And then 2004, they put out the biggest alternative rock album of the 2000s, commercially and otherwise. Where you saw a band like The Offspring just kind of fade into obscurity in a lot of ways. Still able to tour full time and has a lot of hits, but Green Day literally bought themselves another 20 years of playing arenas with American Idiot. It was just so huge. And then The Offspring at that point just kind of fell off and were not really, an important band. They had more than one album. I would say they had two pretty big successful records with hit singles. Maybe 2.5 if you want to call 96 Ixnay on the Hombre one. But that was definitely considered a disappointment at the time. And then they come back with Americana in late 97. Only 14 months after the release of Ixnay on the Hombre. So the album was not a success when you're back in the studio within less than a year. But yeah, a band like No Doubt, like biggest album ever, and then their 2000 follow-up 5 years later, it was just different. Like the scene had kind of passed. It was just weird that there wasn't, a more transition record in the middle somewhere, like 97 or 98. It just was so different. And a lot of people say that's because Gwen Stefani's brother was still in the band when they recorded Tragic Kingdom, even though he left before it blew up and wasn't really touring with them after. He apparently was one of the main songwriters. He played keyboards. And apparently that has a lot to do with why their sound changed so much. And then they ended up hiring Pharrell, the Neptunes, the producers, to do an album that actually came out less than 14 months after Return of Saturn, which was their 2000 follow-up to Tragic Kingdom. They come out with Rocksteady in 2001. They do have some hits. I mean, they have like pop radio hits. Keep you hella good, keep on dancing. It was a huge hit, but it was just something different. It was a pop production. No Doubt's not going in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. If they had one other record, like Tragic Kingdom, if they had a follow-up earlier that was just great, you only need two huge monster records to get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Green Day's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The Offspring, not so much. Not so much. They needed one more. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's a joke anyway. But, like Soundgarden's still not in it, which is ridiculous. But anyway, this got really long. I'm kind of rambling here. This is a freaking half-hour podcast at this point. So yeah, you got a lot of extra music talk. I'm going to bring you some bonus jams. I'll bring you another 89 jam. I'll bring you a Chili Peppers song from Mother's Milk, 1989. And maybe I'll bring you another bonus jam from Nirvana's Bleach album, 1989. So we got the Beastie Boys, 1989, Shake Your Rump. We got Soundgarden. I'm going to tell you which song I pick below. It's either going to be Loud Love or one. I'm going to choose between one other song. Beastie Boys, Soundgarden, and then 9 Inch Nails. I was at the bottom. What's the name of that song again? Down in It. Just to do something different. And then I'll bring you a Chili Pepper song from the 89 record. The only single that was really played anywhere mainstream was their cover. Their George Clinton cover. People keep on working. Na 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 na. What was that called? Higher Ground. It's a cover, so I want to do something original. I'll either do the song Magic Johnson or Knock Me Down, and then I'll bring you a song off of Bleach from Nirvana. So 5 songs from 1989 from bands who continued to have major success from the beginning to the 90s to the end of the 90s. And in the case of the Chili Peppers, a long period in the middle with nothing. But they did have, one of the biggest rock records in 91 and one of the biggest rock records in 99. They just didn't have as much in the middle. Obviously, Nirvana's career was cut short. But I think just because of the massiveness of those two, major label records, we'll do it as a bonus jam. And it really is a shame that the Chili Peppers did not have one more album in the middle with John Frusciante with the main lineup. It's amazing how relevant they are. And you just got to think, wow, 1991 and 1999. Man, we should have gotten 2 records in the middle, at least one that's really good. And, they had their song Soul to Squeeze that was recorded for the 91 record, Blood Sugar Sex Magic, that they just felt like they had too many songs, and they didn't really have a lot of slow songs before, so since they had Under the Bridge, they decided to hold off on putting that one on the record, and it ended up going on the Conehead soundtrack. Not a joke. It's actually one of my favorite songs. So that blew up on MTV in late 93, early 94, kind of off cycle from the, they were so far removed from their last record. It would have been cool if they had another album, you know? It could have been 91, 94, 97, 2000. You know? It, we should have gotten more from Prime Red Hot Chili Peppers. But anyway, I don't even know how I talked for like a half an hour. This is insane. I hope you don't mind the crazy extra music talk. And I love you guys. Later.